Welcome to the Worldbuilder's Anvil, episode 93. Today's topic is surviving the creative. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the Worldbuilder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Okay, now welcome back. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and I'm here today with a very special co-host,
Kristen Ingram.
Kristen Ingram. She is, just for those of you who do not know, she is my spouse and my partner in all things. And actually, we currently have another podcast together called Small Biz Life, in which we talk about the money side of running a business. And as a creative person who's trying to sell your product, if you want to know more about how to do it correctly and you don't want to go broke, I would also check out that show. I will put a link to it in the show notes of this episode. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about surviving the creative. And by that, I mean, some people might say that creative people are different in the way they view the world.
No.
My wife is shocked by this. She's not heard this before, but it's something I've heard on the radio. And the problem is, in part, our minds are in places that aren't real. Our minds are making things up. Our minds operate the best when not in reality. Would you see any of those traits in your husband?
No.
No? Okay.
No, you are very reality-based and sane.
So, one of the reasons I wanted to have my wife on today, well, there's actually two reasons. One, I just got over knee surgery, and I could not get a time set up with my co-host to go over the regularly scheduled episode for this week, which was about secret societies. We will get back to that next week. I thought this was a good chance to bring my wife on, and we could talk about how do you get buy-in? How do you get your spouse, the person, your significant other, the person you live with, to actually allow you the time it takes to be creative? In full disclosure, my wife is also my muse, and she's been very supportive, more supportive than she needs to be, but she helps me break through my mental barriers, my fear of moving forward. And I do appreciate that a lot. But let's get some of her perspective. So, what are the kinds of things that you need as a person to get buy-in, to allow me to have the time it takes to be creative?
I think for me, seeing your schedule helped a lot because I could see that you had time for us. You had time to help me get things done around the house. And then you also had time for your writing. And I knew when those times were. So I wasn't guessing, should I not bother him right now because he's writing? I know when your writing time is. I know when your podcasting time is.
Yes.
So that really helps me kind of schedule my stuff around that.
Very good. And I want to say is, you have buy-in when your spouse is on you when you're not following your schedule. When you're not writing a lot, when you're not doing that kind of stuff, she knows that. And actually, it helps hold me accountable because it's I know she knows when my writing times are. And if I'm not writing, why am I not writing? And there are sometimes excuses that do come in, especially for someone like me who works full time during the day, who does podcast on the side as well, too. There's sometimes reasons why I can't write. However, as a writer, that's sort of a primary function.
Right. And when you come home, and I know your writing time is from 4:30 to 5:30, if you're kind of milling about, I'm like, are you going to write? Because you're supposed to be writing.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
And I just bring that up, one, to give my wife some praise, but two, to show getting buy-in is more than just them leaving you alone. Getting buy-in is getting their support. And I think I actually want to jump down to the final point, which is partners. The reason I want to jump down to partners is because I think the thing that people have to understand, when you are married with someone, they are your partner in everything you do. Whether or not you physically do the activity together or not, you need their support to do anything. And there's more to writing than being a writer. There's a business side to it. There's understanding marketing and learning about marketing. And there are all sorts of activities that as a writer you despise doing because it's focused in the real world. And having the support, having your spouse as your partner, I think gives you a strong benefit, someone who can aid you in those tasks and at least give you moral support and them to help keep you motivated to do your buffers and all of your social media that you have to do, all the things that take you away from your writing, just to help keep you sane.
Well, and I think too, when you're publishing a book, if you want to do it right, there is a huge financial side to it. And I think getting together with your spouse and putting that budget together so that they know the financial resources that the two of you need to put together in order to get this off the ground is really key. Because I think for a lot of spouses, when you go to them and you say, I want to be a writer, and as the spouse, you sit there and go, okay, so what does that mean? You know, what is that going to look like for us? And even financially, what is that going to look like? So one thing that we did is we sat down, we said, okay, this is how much the book is going to cost, the editing, the art, and we put together a really tight budget for what we were going to spend. And I think that helped me because once I could put some numbers to it and then say, okay, what do you think we can sell? It wasn't hard to make that money back. And so it didn't seem so overwhelming, especially when we're writing big checks.
Helps mitigate the risk of the money loss because especially if you're self-publishing, there's a much larger financial risk on the writer, on the people who are publishing the book, because essentially you're paying for everything, you know, and if you're not getting the editing, you're probably not going to get the book sales. You're going to get bad reviews up front and it's going to look really bad for you. But I do think that you need to know what you want to spend money on, and there are tons of resources out there that will talk to you about that, about the self-publishing cost. But even if you are being traditionally published, a lot of times you get an advance, and that advance is your marketing budget. And if you're lucky, you might get a bit more of a marketing budget on top of it. But unless they think that you're going to be the next big selling book, then sorry, I'm laughing a bit as one of our cats has invaded the studio table now. Thank you, Pooh Bear. But one of the big things is a lot of the money you're going to make is going to actually go towards marketing your book, because unless they think you're the next big marketing sensation, the next book that will have the movie deals or the TV series on HBO, they're not going to dump a lot of resources into you after the editing. So now, writing time. This is a tricky one. This is something you need as a writer. And I work full time during the day, so I try and have at least an hour a day put aside to writing, even though I'm not always writing very effectively in those times. That way I'm always moving the ball forward on the writing side of things. And also, you need to schedule this time with your spouse. They need to know that you're writing now. Hold off on asking them to go to the grocery store for you. Hold off on all of that type of behavior. Hi, Smoochy Pants. Yes, we have lots of kitties aiding the Ingrams in their podcasting this afternoon. But you really need that time set aside to where you can be left alone as best as possible. Now, if you have kids, that could be much more difficult. When kids need help, they need help. But if you're working together as a team and she's covering for you now, you're going to probably owe her and need to cover for her during part of the time as well, too.
Well, I think that's where if you have kids, either writing very early in the morning or writing later at night.
Yeah.
You know, because if you can wake up before everybody else wakes up to do your writing, then it's not a big deal. If you're trying to do it at night, then your spouse has to understand that this block after the kids go to bed is my writing time, and I need that.
I have to see if I can find that article. There's actually an article I saw that actually stated that they believe people wrote better creatively when they were tired. Especially, I think, meaning like first draft. Obviously not fine-tuning language, probably not, but writing first draft when you're tired, your brain's a bit more open to express itself, supposedly, when you're tired. So that's definitely one thought, whether or not you have children. But for me, I don't write the best at that point. I write the best when I have a somewhat clear mind, not perfectly clear.
Well, you don't have the inhibitions that most people have.
I'm full of inhibitions. Excuse me.
You're full of something.
I'm full of something. I'm a fiction writer. I lie. Which reminds me, I still need to come up with a good nickname for Mike. He's very jealous. He came up with a great one for me, my own little tagline, and he feels left out now.
It's Michael.
He would appreciate that.
Even if he's not here, I'm going to stick up for him.
Oh, because he's not here, you'll stick up for him. If he was here, you'd be calling him Mike. Okay. Now, sharing. I think this is a good thing to some level, and I think this depends a lot on the tolerance level of your spouse. Or your significant other. Share with them bits and pieces of what you're working on. Much the same way, like if you're at work and you're building a widget at work, you might talk a little bit about what your day was like. Hopefully they'll find it a bit more interesting than a widget at work. But, it kind of shows that progress is happening, and do you think that kind of thing is helpful for you or?
Well, I think especially, even if it's not like details of what you're like, the story that you're working on. Like last week when you said, second draft went off to the editor for your book. I was like, oh, cool. Okay. So the book is progressing. I know, where you are with the book. So that helps, especially, when you disappear for an hour every day, it's kind of nice to know that the book has moved on to the next phase. And that, and, sending me weird text messages I can't read because they're in Badrakian, which is one of your languages.
Yes, that is one of my languages. And I'm actually kind of hurt that you don't know how to read Badrakan.
You can't read Badrakan.
I can with my Word file open. If this is a language I did create for myself, I'm not a linguist. It's probably far from perfect, but it was a great learning exercise. I think I understood more about phonics through writing a language than I definitely did in school because I was not taught phonics. But I do think that it's a good exercise to do, even if you don't want that level of detail for your world, just to do one. Just so you know what a language is like, because languages are the backbone of a culture. They are the pictures that people see in their heads, are the words that they form. But I'm getting a bit off a topic with that, so which is easy for me to do because my wife has accused me of being ADD, which is so untrue because I can stay focused for hours and hours when I'm doing world building. It's just everything else I have trouble focusing on. Giving back. And I think this is an important one. I touched upon this one a little bit earlier. You have to be able to give back to your spouse. So another point is lead, don't follow. Start trying to remember to take the trash out a little bit without having to be told. And you're never going to be up to your spouse. At least if you're the male, you'll probably never be up to the spouse's need for it. But I think occasionally if they don't have to actually tell you to take out the trash, it's probably positive.
I think the easiest way to get your spouse on board is to do those, the things around the house that you're supposed to do. Because otherwise, when you're writing, your spouse is going to sit there and say, oh, well, he's writing, but he's not taking out the trash or he's not doing this. Or it's much more helpful if you're doing the chores that you're supposed to be doing without being prompted.
Yeah.
Then the person can appreciate the fact that you're taking your writing time, instead of being like bitter about it.
Yeah. Like, oh, gee, they have time to do the writing again, but they don't have time to take out the trash. I think that's a big one. I think that helps a lot too, because I know at least for you and in our scenario, you get focused when things aren't getting done. All you think about is all the things that you need to get done, all the things I need to get done, and that kind of screws up your life beyond just the fact that I'm writing.
Right.
And I don't know if that's true for everyone, but, part of this is you need to know the person you're with. Chris and I are very fortunate in the fact that we get along very well. We actually want to spend time with each other. We know a lot about each other. I think that helps us because, much the same way I have what I do here, my wife also does a lot on her own too. So it's a little easier, I think, for us in that sense where you have, it might be different if you're in a scenario when one person is looking to do something, non-traditional and the other person isn't. So you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I've seen that in a lot of the business owners that I work with, where one person is really driven and really motivated and the other person isn't. And they don't really understand why they're doing, what they're doing, whether they're a writer or whether they're a small business person or they have some other hustle that they're working on. It's really hard for the non-hustle spouse to understand, why they're working so hard. And sometimes they kind of feel left out, which is why I like your idea of sharing and giving back and getting involved.
Yeah.
One thing I think that might be helpful is if you're trying to gauge, what to do for your spouse. There's this great site called 5 Love Languages where you can take a quiz and your spouse or your significant other can take a quiz. And it will tell you the types of things you can do for your spouse to make them feel appreciated.
Yes, and that's a good one too, because I don't think there's any real shockers for either one of us when we took it, but it helped reinforce, the importance of certain things to each other, like the idea of what was the one, love as a service. I have trouble even remember what it's called.
Acts of service.
Acts of service, is a way of showing love to people, which for me was barely on my radar, but, for my wife was a very important thing. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I focus on those kind of activities. Other spouses might like getting gifts, maybe not something expensive, but just little things given to them because that's how they feel loved the most. And it'll let you target each other, the things that are really the most important. Focus your energies when you have time to do that, which you should make time for if you don't.
And we'll put the link to that in the show notes.
So a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about can apply beyond just your spouse or the person you live with, which should be the top priority in this scenario. But this will extend to all your friends and loved ones. But, especially, like for Kristen and I, where we both have this sort of hustler's attitude towards getting into less traditional areas of work. We know a lot of people who we love to death who just don't understand it at all. And you have to realize that they're your friends too. And there's certain types of activities you do with them. And there's certain types of activities you do with other people. You don't want to have someone who does not understand a hustle, I don't think, be your accountability partner because they don't understand the hustle at all. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just, something you have to keep in mind. You have to know the people who your friends and, family, I think when you interact with them. So.
And I think it's important if your friends and your family don't understand what you're doing, mm-hmm. find people who
yes.
do.
Mm-hmm.
We are super blessed to have found
yes.
communities that even if they don't really get the whole fantasy writing, world building, making fantasy stuff,
yes.
they do understand that like you're working towards a goal.
Mm-hmm.
They get what it's like to work towards a goal and they support you in it no matter what. And I think that for both of us has been incredibly helpful.
Yes. And, I have to give, we're in these groups called masterminds, which sort of help you stay on task, I guess, was the best way. You work with peers. 30 Days of Hustle, I want to give a shout out to, and Dreamers and Builders and Launch Out.
Which are all John Acuff groups.
Which are all John Acuff groups that we joined up after I read Start, which is the thing that helped me get past the fear the most, I think, was Start. And, that my wife prodded me. But it's sort of like, when I tell my wife something and then, after months of telling her this and she'll come up to me and say, oh, I guess what I learned today. And she'll tell me what I've been telling her for months. Yes, Boober. She'll be telling me what I've been telling her for months. Like it's a new revelation because someone who is less biased towards her, I guess, came up with the idea. But, that works in both ways. And it's easy to sit there and go, oh, I can't believe she does that all the time to me. And she's not horrible at doing that all the time. But, when it happens, you kind of feel like, don't you listen to me? But on the other end, too, she was telling me for months before I read Start, and she's the one who made me read Start, that you need to do that.
Well, I knew there was something wrong when you came home and you said, I want to go to law school. after you said, I'm never going back to college again. I'm done. I'm never doing it again. And when you came home and you said, okay, I'm going to go to law school, and you started studying for the LSAT, and I was just in there going, no, you're supposed to write. Like, you have the fact that you had 20 years in a world and it was just all in your head. You were meant to do something with that, right? And so that's why I pushed you to read Start, because it had made such a huge impact on me. And a lot of what he deals with is the fear piece, which I think that's
the thing that does hold you back. And go back to listen to all of the interviews.
Well, and it's funny because, and I think that's something for everybody who wants to do something that's outside the box. It's funny because like every time you would put out, I remember in particular, you hadn't run a game for a while and you just kind of like emailed all of your old players and said, hey, we're going to do a game if you want to show up. And we have 15 people show up, and so I always thought it was funny that you were so afraid to share your stories. But, when you put a call out for players, they overran our house.
Yes. That does not help get you spousal buy-in when 15 people show up to the house.
When you're expecting like 6. It's like a clown car. They just kept coming.
It's so funny, from my wife's perspective, until she met me, she's maybe heard of tabletop role-playing. She knew of fantasy, but it was nothing major in your life. You kind of liked video games. You sort of had some geek tendencies, but I really kind of pushed you over the edge because everyone needs a healer in an MMO. And
I'm more into the video game side and the movie side than I am into the tabletop side. I've played a couple times, but
you like mine, but you've never really wanted to play with anyone else.
No.
Yeah. That's mainly because of Gyprolings.
Gyprolings are awesome.
And to give you a quick idea of what a Gyproling is, a Gyproling is, the best way to describe it, it's a fairy style of a creature. It is approximately a yard tall, so about 3 feet tall. It looks like a young infant, like a tall toddler. In coordination, Gibber's the same. It was literally inspired when me and my friend Matthew Bannock were in this series of watching Japanese war movies, like from feudal times on television. And my nephew was a toddler, and he would sit there and he would be talking back to the television like kids that age try and mimic you. And my nephew was doing that to us, and it sounded like he was gibbering or gibbering. And and that's kind of where that creature came from. And it was sort of me and my friend just kind of bouncing stuff back and forth. And then we just started torturing players with it because it was a lot of fun.
And they're highly magical and chaotic.
They're highly magical and chaotic. If you're a player in role-playing games, you want to and don't want to run into them because it's usually a fun session. However, it's usually embarrassing.
The player wants to run into them. The character does not.
Yeah, that's probably the better way of putting it, yes. But yeah, so it's important, one, find your spouse's tolerance. And most people, if you're like a tabletop person like me and your spouse is not, you're probably not getting them to the game table. However, I think the thing to keep in mind is find their level of tolerance and work them into that level. And maybe it's just knowing what's going forward, knowing what you're stuck on. If you could use help, one of the non-creative tasks of putting the book together, once they support you, it's usually 100%. And if you can get that 100% buy-in, it will make both of your lives so much better and your relationship, I think.
Yeah, figure out what your spouse's strengths are and see if, you can ask them to use their strengths to help you.
Mm-hmm. And if they don't have the hustling gene, you have to understand that you might not get the level of support you're looking for from them, but unless they have the hustling gene, that desire to really move to a non-traditional way, you can't expect it. And you should be grateful for any help they give you, even if it's just physical vocal support.
Yeah, and even if it's just that they, they are supportive of you taking the time.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's really the biggest thing. Writing, 70, 100,000 words every 3 months is a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all there is for today's episode. But now what I'd like to give you is the Worldbuilder Task of the day. And this is one you can have kind of fun with. One I think that will allow you to sort of bring the person in, even if they're not necessarily interested in the fantasy side of things or the world building side of things. Build a part of the world for them, something that when they hear about makes them giggle like my wife giggles about Gyprolings. I ended up putting them in my first book because she requested it. And they weren't meant to go into that book, but they worked very well. They helped add some, I think, fun times earlier on in the book. So I worked them in because I knew it would make her giddy just thinking that they're in there. So create a part of your world like that for your spouse. Maybe it's recreating the place you fell in love. Maybe she wants to be a monster. Maybe she wants to be a hero, but like a Gandalf kind of hero, someone big. Make a part of the world where she can fit in, even though she's not really part of it.
Well, think about it's people name stars after their loved ones. Yeah. It's like you, as a creative person, you have the opportunity to put your loved one, put their touch, right, into something that you're creating. Mm-hmm. And then that's eternal. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're a creative person, that is one of the coolest gifts that you can give a loved one. Just don't turn your spouse into some raging monster that's going to get slaughtered. That might not be a good thing.
Yeah, you don't want them to be slaughtered. Definitely don't want to slaughter your spouse.
They might take that the wrong way.
And if you make them a monster, make sure that they think it's a fun idea first. Yeah. Don't do it as a surprise bag. Oh, and on page 42, honey, I introduce a character that's based on you, and it's Medusa. That might be considered offensive.
Yeah, just a bit.
So do it, but be thoughtful when you do it. All right. And now the real world task of the day. Plan out your next steps with your spouse. And if they're a good organizational person, they can probably even help you make your plan better. But let them know what you need to do, where you need to go. And the thing is, sketch it out first. Unless they have something that you can help them plan with, sketch out what your plan is first and then take it to them. Don't brainstorm it with them. Unless they are a kind of person who has their own kind of thing that they might need that sort of help with, then it's a very useful exercise. My wife and I do this occasionally with each other to help keep us both on track. Plan out your next steps with your spouse. Let them know what's going on. Be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, and I would just say if you're going to schedule some time to work on your project, sit down with your spouse and ask them what time of the day would work best for them.
Yes, definitely. And that's the thing. Go back to that one. Is when's the best time for writing time? And if you have kids, it's probably not when you first get home from work. It's probably not why the kids are awake unless they're older. But that's one of those things that could be unique to any household. Mm-hmm. All right. And now the tease for the next episode. We will be going back to secret societies. Ooh. Like that. Ooh, yes. The Illuminati. Or not. No such thing. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at Gardul.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.